Yeah, g'day YouTubers. Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about the geometry of hexa. And I don't know how it came about, whether it was by accident, but I certainly know that going back many years ago when I had my old GMC grinder, which was only Global Machinery Company, for those that may remember. This is the original wheel that was off that, and I brought that in 2006. Back in those days, I really just used it on every chain, whether it was 3/8 standard or 3/8 low profile. Really didn't pay any attention to what I was doing. I would set it at 30 degrees and off I'd go, just sharpen it up. It wasn't until, and I didn't even dress it. I didn't dress that stone probably for about 4 or 5 years. And it wasn't until I really started to get into chainsaws and geometry and axes and everything else that I'd realised that in the full chisels, it looked like a bit of a hexa type shape. I called it a V cut. And I remember only going back about 4 years ago, and I was on the internet and I was looking around and looking at videos when hexa started to come out about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, wherever it was, something like that. And I thought, wow, that looks a little bit similar to my full chisels. A little bit of similarity there. And I started, after I'd seen Husqvarna's X cut, I thought, if I reprofile my wheel, I've almost got that profile. I just need to clean the wheel up a little bit. So back then, what I was doing was virtually dressing the wheel up. And if you look at this, it's 90 degrees. So I was just dressing the wheel up so that the wheel was flat, no radius. So in that case there, I only had, at best, I think, and I'll have a picture, display a picture now. If you actually look at the picture, which is dated about 2 years ago, you'll notice, and I've taken a picture of it, and I've called it V cut. And all as I did was dress the bottom of this wheel up. And sometimes I'd dress it up. I experimented a little bit. Most of the time it was around about 90 degrees, between 90 and 100 degrees. And I just thought, yeah, this works okay. And even then, when I was doing that, I really didn't really know much about hexa or X cut or anything else. I just had a bit of a vision, may have been going through, I may have seen a glimpse of hexa or something like that there, but really didn't take any notice of it. It wasn't until, it'd only be in the last 2 years that I really started paying attention to some of the geometry that was in full chisels like the hexa and the X cut, and said, that looks very similar to what I'm doing, but I still didn't pay a lot of attention. I just thought, it looks very similar. And really, going back even a few years ago, if it worked, it worked. So in other words, if I went out and brought a full chisel and it had a little bit of a peak on it, a bit of a beak on it, and it worked, fine. I could reprofile the wheel, but in most cases, I didn't really profile the wheel except for my V cut. That was the only profiling that I really did. And it wasn't until I got an Oregon type grinder and a Steel USG grinder and all the other grinders that I got in the last 2 years or so that I really got into it and started paying attention of what was out there and why the geometry was the way that it was and how good it worked. So I paid much more attention. And what I found out, that especially if you look at hexa, and if we look at this type of profile here, which is similar to Hexa. This is my V cut, as you can see. It's a right angle, so that's what I base this on my profile. And what I sort of started to realize, that when you look at the geometry of the top plate, in most cases it was between 25 and 30 degrees. 25 degrees being fairly common, and 30 degrees also being fairly common, you know, whether you're using hardwood or softwood. But with Hexa, if you actually turn the tooth and look at it like this, you'll notice that, you know, especially in Hexa has 25 degrees here, and if you're using a steel grinder, they still have 25 degrees here, but that's 65 degrees on an Oregon grinder. So this angle and this angle are the same, and when you look at it, it's like an arrow. If you look at it that way, it's like an arrow. And this is what penetrates the wood so good. And this is why Hexa actually works really good. And when you look at a normal full chisel, yes, it's still got a bit of a point at the front, but that point drops off. Whereas on the Hexa, it actually goes down about the same length, almost the same length of the width of the tooth. So Hexa is about 4 millimeters, but the Hexa doesn't come down as deep, but it still comes down pretty deep, well over 2 millimeters. So if we look at the first tooth chain, we've got a series of chains here, and it's interesting when you look at them and you look at the geometry of them. So the first one here is your Hexagonal X-Cut C85. And if we zoom right in there and you have a good look at it, we'll just drop this down so that you can see it even better. That all as it has is a very small, pointy part here, which is at 45 degrees. It's actually very extreme. 45 degrees, that is. That's actually quite, you can see it quite good there. And again, if you were to hold the chain at an angle like this, the whole idea is that it bites into the timber. So that's their version, X-Cut, C85. Then if we go to the next chain, which is the steel. Now this is a steel chain, and I'll just turn it over this way. This is just your normal full chisel chain, nothing special about it, but it still does have a very, very slight little, if you have a look at there is a little tiny bit of a notch on that, a bit of a beak. So it's a little bit different than a round circular file. You can see the point on it. And again, the same sort of thing, if you hold the tooth like that, you can see that point on there. It's designed to bite into the timber. That's the whole idea what they're doing with this Hexa type profile. To really bite into that timber. So that's a standard full chisel. And you can see that that's a little bit like the X-Cut. It's actually got that real pointy part there. It may only be over 0.5 millimeter or so, but it's definitely got that little point on it. So that's your standard full chisel chain. Now, the next one is the actual steel Hexa, so I'll get that out of the way. And as you can see that the point on the steel Hexa comes down the side plate, probably around about the 70% mark, whereas on the previous chain it only came down a little bit. And if you hold the chain, you can definitely see how that point, like a spear type shape, will penetrate the timber. So that straight section on the Hexa is quite long, as you can see there. And on my V cut, I was coming down right down here, where on the side plate where it's the transition. So I'm coming right down a lot further. And the next chain that we've got is a hurricane chain. So this is a hurricane chain made by Jono and Jono, and this is the one that I duplicated for Hexa. If you look at some of my other videos where I modified the grinding wheel, so this just duplicates Hexa as best as possible and works quite well. So really happy with that. So that one works quite well. And the last chain is the standard full chisel hurricane chain. Now, the funny thing is, doesn't this look very similar to the Husky X-Cut? Very similar. A lot of manufacturers are making them like this. We'll try and put the two together and you'll find out that there's not a lot of deal of difference between the two of them. So if you pay attention to the little pointy part of the tooth, very similar, almost identical. There's a little slight bit of difference. The difference is that on the Hurricane, this is a 60-degree angle. This is a 45-degree angle right there. That's a 45-degree angle, and this is a 60-degree. So really that's about the difference. Even the way that it sweeps down the bottom of the side plate, it's a little bit more of a sweep here, but very similar. So yes, you can play around a little bit, and a lot of manufacturers are. And as I said, I think the reason that Hexa works much better than a standard full chisel is because it really does look like a bit of a spear when you look at it that way. So these two edges are matching up. If you've got 30 degrees this side and 60 degrees that side, which is exactly the same, it's only the reference point it's different. So these are the same angle. So on Hexa, you got that same angle. And look, the way that I see it with Hexa is this angle down here is not anywhere as important. And that's why on the X-Cut, it's got that sweeping, like a bit of the C shape on the bottom. It's this main part here. It's probably the first 2 millimeters that's the most critical. The rest, after that, I don't think it really matters what shape it is. So I'm pretty sure what's happened, that X-Cut it came out with their version and still didn't want to copy it. They wanted theirs totally different. But I'm 99% sure, because in all the experiments that I conducted with the GMC wheel, it was most important the first, say, 2 millimeters coming down on that angle, on that 60-degree angle. That was the most critical. And I found out that if you came down on that angle, that it would last a lot longer. So I came right into the middle. As you can see, when I made this tooth, I came right into the middle, which is the same as the picture. So if I display that picture again, you'll find out that it looks identical to that. And that's what I based this all on, using this wheel. So that was my version of it. Yeah, sure, I got a few ideas off the internet, but at that particular stage there, I really wasn't paying attention to Husqvarna's X-Cut, and I wasn't paying attention to, I wasn't paying any attention to Still's Hexa. I always remember reading up when they spoke about the C shape, and and I'd realise, and they spoke about that when you're using a file, that it creates a 60-degree angle here. But as my wheel wore down, and I don't know whether I could draw it on here. I'll see whether I could draw it. I noticed I started to get where the blue texture is. It was, rather than a C shape, it was more straight, a little bit like, it was a little bit more defined than what this tooth is. So it looked a little bit more straighter than that. And that's why I thought, I wonder what happens. So when the idea came into my head, I thought, I wonder what happens if I, and that's when I decided that I'd reface that wheel. And then I thought, that looks like a V shape. And that's where the V cut come from. And then I saw Hexa. And then when I saw the Hexa, I thought, that's a bit different. It's got more of a beak on it. So, yeah, then I started to modify the wheel, and so that I could do my own Hexa. And I compared Hexa and my V cut, and I found out that there was not much difference in it. Very, very difficult to pick the difference. And that's why it brings me back to the most important part of a full chisel tooth is this working corner. So it's dead sharp, and if it comes down on a bit of an angle, at least 1 millimetre to 2 millimetres, that's all it's really required. The rest, coming down further on that angle or changing the angle here, I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever, because if you remember, if you're using a round file, the round file just creates that nice C shape here. And then they just say clean your gullet out so that it's nice and dead straight. So you've got this nice C shape, nice and level here. So this shape here to me is irrelevant. I think this is more, it just looks better. There's going to be others that are going to argue, but there's not a huge deal of difference. If you can almost draw a straight line. I'll actually do it. If I grab this tooth and draw a straight line on it, there's not a huge deal of difference. Just going to draw a line on here. When you look at that, even though it mightn't look at it, I've drawn 2 straight lines. Those 2 straight lines is virtually Hexa. Somebody invented the square-faced full chisel. Not too sure on, trying to do a Google search, and I didn't really come up with who invented the full chisel chain. Not even too sure about even the Hexa and this little point on there when that all started. Probably talking about less than 20 years ago, something like that there. But definitely these days, this is quite common by a lot of chain manufacturers that are making full chisel, that they're putting a little bit of an extra point on there. And the other thing is, if you're using a round file, you're going to destroy that point, which was my point that I made in the other video. You really need a grinding wheel to get that shape. That shape there cannot be done accurately using files. You'd have to use two files to do that, and even then, each tooth would be different. So you're wasting your time trying to use a round file on anything that's got a hexagonal type shape. You'll destroy the hexagonal shape by trying to do that. Or any type of full chisel that has a edge that's coming down straight. Yeah, round file's going to destroy it. Much better if you dress the wheel. As I said, if you start to put a bit of a flat on the wheel, you'll be able to get that hexagonal type shape. So in conclusion, there's quite a lot of companies out there that they're all copying each other. And as far as I know, Husqvarna was probably one of the first with its X-Cut. So it was probably one of the first that had that little pointy beak, if you will. Very pointy beak, bit of a parrot's beak there. And a lot of the others just copied. This is a Hurricane chain. And same thing, it's got that little very sharp point. While these sharp points really do work well, problem with them is that if you put a round file in there, you're going to destroy them. And that makes me think, well, why did you design it in the first place like that? And you recommend using a file. So what's the point of going out and buying a tooth that's shaped like this and you're telling people to use a file? Because you're going to destroy the shape in the first place. So to me, there's no point even trying to manufacture something like this if it's going to be destroyed in the first place. Now, the only thing, when I spoke to the dealer at Husqvarna, and I said to him, well, you're not going to be able to put a file in that very good. And he said, oh, normally what we do, we put it on the grinder and we just angle it slightly different. All as I can say that if you're going to sell something like this, you should recommend that it be done, sharpened on a grinder to maintain this shape. So in other words, the grinding wheel should be dressed so that it has this type of shape. There is no point selling a chain that's only going to work once. You put a file through it and it changes the profile completely. That is my argument with all the manufacturers that are doing this. They're doing it and you only get to use the chain once if you're a hand filer. And there's a lot of hand filers out there. So I do think that the hexagonal shape works really good. And even when you go and have a look at the tooth. So I redrew that line. That is 120 degrees. So that's virtually what Hexa looks like. And as you can see, that if you get rid of the blue and erase that metal, you've got Hexa. So this is your curve from the file or your grinder. The normal C shape is what we refer to. And if you reshape the grinding wheel to Hexa, you've got to remove that amount of metal. It's not a huge amount, but nonetheless, it is a different profile. And to me, it does work. And I'm really happy with it. And all my full chisel chains in the future will definitely have that Hexa type shape in it. Or my own version, which is the V-cut. So I've got both wheels to do both. Depends what I feel like doing. I'll probably do half and half until I get a better opinion on it. If you're using these, and I'm sure some of the professionals can tell you that if you're using a chainsaw day in, day out, you'll definitely get the feel of which chain and what profile is working better for the timber that you're cutting. Not every single profile will work better on every single bit of timber. Like an example is, semi-chisel really does work good in hardwood. Full chisel also works good in hardwood, but it cuts through medium type timber much better, and it will just absolutely plow through soft timber. So it's a very interesting subject, a chainsaw geometry, not one size fits all, if we can use that terminology. So look, thanks for watching. I really enjoy making the videos, and I
Really enjoy the comments, even better when people ask for advice. And sometimes people have even some good advice to offer, which is fantastic. So thanks for watching. Bye for now.